unmute. Where's she? Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 3 of Ideas by Interpreters. This is a very exciting episode because we have Jasmin Gerwien here with us, an experienced Arabic interpreter. Jasmin, if you want to say hi to the crowd.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world.
Yeah, very true. We've got people from all over the world. So, yeah, this is really exciting because this webinar is designed for interpreters. So the more we can get interpreters on here talking about their experiences, the better, in my opinion, because, we want this to be a space for you guys. So that said, this particular webinar is going to be based around what it takes to become a skilled legal interpreter. And just before starting here, I want to kind of distinguish between what it means to be a legal interpreter, because there's a lot of different, definitions of it. You can be a court interpreter, and that's a very specific certification, and it depends on which state you're in or country even, of course. But in this episode, we're going to be talking specifically about Jasmin's experiences and some of the trainings she does around legal interpretation, as well as other topics like code of ethics. We'll get into it. But anyways, I'm going to give the floor here to Jasmin. So let's hear from you, Jasmin. Can everybody?
Yes.
I'm just going to share my screen here just to make sure everyone can see it. Cool. Okay. So let's get started. Jasmin, if you could just introduce yourself, let us know kind of how you got into the interpreting industry, where you're at now.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you to all the participants in this webinar. I'm excited to share some of my experiences as an Arabic English interpreter and translator for over 20 years. And I'm going to tell you how I started my interpreting career and why I decided to become an interpreter. What happened is when I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, and we had the 1983 Summer Universiade, and it was from July 1st for 10 days straight. So one of the family friends, he worked at the Universiade and asked me if I would be an interpreter and a guide tour for some of the Arabic teams. So I agreed. I worked for 10 days straight. I was a bit nervous, my first time interpreting, and I just enjoyed it so much. Interpreting felt so natural to me, and the rewards were amazing because I felt I was able to bridge the gap between the non-English speaking teams with the English speaking. So some of the Middle Eastern teams were very appreciative, and I received an appreciation certificate for a job well done. Then after that, shortly after that, I was asked to perform interpreting at the University of Alberta for Middle Eastern soccer coaches and soccer players. So I was on the field interpreting on the soccer field. And of course, at the time, I'm new at this. I didn't know I was being watched by the people that hired me. So of course, you know how it is as a female, and you get some male players who try to make advances and ask you if you would go out for coffee, lunch, or dinner. Of course, at the time, politely, I turned them down and continued to do the job I was there to do, which was interpreting only. After that, I decided I like this interpreting career. It's so rewarding. So I decided to join Couple Translation Agency here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And I joined the agencies. They start to, of course, first thing they do, the agency, when you start with them, is they start teaching you about the code of ethics and how the interpreting protocols work and so on, what to do and what not to do when you're out on an assignment. So the translation agencies, after I learned with them what I had to learn, they start sending me on assignments. So of course, the first assignments I did was for a lawyer. the lawyer was happy with my services. The translation agency was happy with my services. And then, of course, my first experience was as translating was I translated a book from Arabic into English for a college. And then I start to go on assignments. So, of course, my first assignment, just so you know, and that was for me the turning point, and that's when I never took my interpreting career for granted. I was interpreting for a lawyer in his office, and it was examination for discovery. And I had no idea that the lawyer was Arabic speaking lawyer, understood the Arabic language. So as I'm interpreting, the lab, we're going to call them lab, the limited English proficiency. Thank you, Caroline.
Sure.
So some people call them clients. For me, I call my clients the one that hired me for an assignment. So anyways, as I'm interpreting, the lab person was speaking for too long. So I summarized what he was saying. And that's when the lawyer stood up and he said to me, "Madam Interpreter, I speak Arabic and I understand Arabic. So please do not summarize. I want you to interpret line for line and sentence for sentence." And I'm like, oh, this is it for me. So since then, I've learned never to summarize and always interpret to the best of my ability what's been said. Because, I mean, it makes sense now after being an interpreter for over 20 years. I put myself into the people's shoes or situation. Do I want an interpreter to summarize what I'm saying as a client or as a lab? No, of course not. Then after that, I decided interpreting was not so bad. So my first big assignment in the legal profession was I was hired by a defense lawyer to perform interpreting in a criminal trial. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, the defense lawyer happened to be Arabic person again. So of course now the pressure is on. I mean, this is it. Like for me, it's I'm in or out. So I'm at the criminal lawyer. I knew I had a criminal trial coming up. So of course, what did I have to do is I start researching on how the court system works, on the protocols and etiquette of being an interpreter in the court. So of course, I went into the court. Just before I entered the court, the defense lawyer brings in the lab, or if you want to call it a client, and asked me, first of all, if we understand each other. As you know, for some of the Arabic interpreters in the Arabic language, there are different dialects. So I spoke with the person I'm interpreting for, the lab, and we understood one another. And then I walked into court, and the first thing, of course, I did was bow. When you walk into court as an interpreter, this is part of interpreting court etiquette, is that you have to bow when the judge is in the room. So I bowed. I took my position next to the lab I'm interpreting for. And I had a notepad and a pen. It's very, very important to have a notepad with you and a pen. When you're in court, everybody's going to be talking about dates, birth dates, when did the incident happen, and so on. And of course, we're not robots. We're going to forget. So we have to have a notepad with us while we're standing or sitting, wherever we are positioned, to take notes. We have to learn shorthand quickly, how to write dates and names and so on. So as I'm standing there interpreting, now the judge starts to speak, and then the defense lawyer and the prosecutor, everybody's speaking to me at once. And I thought, okay, well, I can't do this. You know, I can't interpret correctly here and do my job right if everybody's speaking to me at once. So, of course, I had to interrupt. And I said, the interpreter would like to interrupt. Would you kindly speak to me one at a time? Do not forget that there is an interpreter here. Because, of course, as some of you that have done legal interpreting or court interpreting, you notice that defense lawyers, prosecutors, judges, they tend to speak really, really fast. And sometimes when they have an interpreter present, it's difficult for them to remember to slow down because there is an interpreter that has to interpret everything that's been said. So I was not shy to do that. And of course, they all, apologize and start to speak slowly. So I was not shy. I was confident enough in my abilities. And I would stop them. And if they're speaking for too long in a sentence, I would stop them and ask them to keep the sentences short, whether it is to the people that work in the courthouse or the lab person I'm interpreting for.
So, Jasmin, just to interject here, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that information. I know it's one very important point is that I think a lot of the time when we're in such a formal setting, we feel nervous or out of place especially to interrupt. But like you said, it's something that you have to do because a lot of people in those formal settings in a courtroom, for example, may not be aware of how interpreting works. And so, yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to, in the interest of time, keep moving on here with some of the other questions. And I think, you've already kind of underlined it, but I thought maybe we could dive into the code of ethics and sort of where this came from, how you use it on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to go to the next slide here.
So, code of ethics. Code of ethics really is common sense. The code of ethics helped me to get a better sense of what to do in certain situations. It's a great tool for us interpreters for our professional development. It is really the do's and the don'ts. Code of ethics, it's you learn how to be accurate at what you do. Confidentiality is so important. You always have to put yourself into the lab position, situation, whatever that's been said in a doctor's office or in a legal setting. People are already nervous as it is about trusting the doctor or the therapist or the lawyer. Imagine having an interpreter in the room. So they want to make sure that that interpreter is going to keep everything confidential. Impartiality, for example, that's a big thing. In being impartial as an interpreter, our role is to be impartial, means we cannot take the side of the client, the English-speaking person, or the side of the lab because they come from the same country we do, or they come from the same culture. We have to be impartial. We have to respect every person that we interpreted for or hired by. Respect is so important. For example, if we're interpreting for a religious person and we're not religious, and we still have to respect that they are religious people. Or if the interpreter happens to be a religious person, but the lab is not religious, well, the interpreter cannot disrespect that person because he is not religious like her or him. So it's really important.
And that goes kind of hand in hand with impartiality as well, just remaining, interpreters are a vessel, yes, but it's also, we're humans. So it's hard to remain impartial at some times, but it's always something that we should remember, not to let our perspectives influence the assignment.
Exactly. And same as maintaining our role boundaries. We, as interpreters, we have role boundaries, and so as the clients, the English-speaking clients, have their role boundaries as well. So we want to make sure that interpreters were able to ask for a quick break or for a drink of water or to leave the room for a minute if we needed some fresh air. You always want to make sure that everything, that nobody can speak over you, you don't speak over anybody, that it's all about respect as well. Accountability, you have to make sure that you're held accountable for what you're doing. When you're interpreting, you want to make sure that you know your assignment very well. You know the terminology to that assignment. Don't take assignments that you're not confident about. Professionalism is so important. whether you're on the telephone interpreting or face to face or video remote. Professionalism, if it's face to face, you have to be dressed in a business attire. You cannot show up in a miniskirt or jeans and so on. Professionalism in not speaking to the lab people in front of the person that hired you, the English speaking person. You cannot have a conversation with them. You have to respect the other person. If the lab says anything to you in your language, you can tell them, I'm sorry, but everything that you say, I would have to interpret. So if there's something you don't want the lawyer to know or the doctor or the therapist, then don't say it. And my role as an interpreter is to interpret everything that's been said. Continuing competence is so important. Keep on learning every day. Go on the internet. There's so many places on the internet to learn. There's so many, the languages are always evolving. So you need to keep up with your English language and with your native language.
Yeah, and also just to highlight there, at the end of the presentation, I'm gonna highlight some contact information for you guys for Jasmine, but also for Buslingo, because we're always here. Especially my role is to help interpreters with professional development and resources. So always feel free to email me, caroline@boostlingo.com, and Jasmine's information will be here at the end of the presentation as well. So let's move on to the next topic. All of these topics go hand in hand, obviously, but we're just talking about them as they're applied to certain situations. In this case, mostly legal. Here we go. Okay, so protocols and procedures in different settings, like I was saying, some things to maybe consider here. And Jasmine, you can talk more about this to us as well when your experience. How does the role of the interpreter change, specifically, in different interpreting settings? So courtroom versus outside of a courtroom. Obviously, the protocols are going to be very different if you are, doing a interpreting assignment in a courtroom. So let's touch on that a little bit.
First of all, the role of an interpreter is to bridge the communication gap. What does the interpretation involve? And it doesn't matter what setting you're in. Is one, listening. Number two, understanding. Number three, transferring information to another language. And number four, speaking. If you're in a courtroom, for example, you have to follow the court etiquette by bowing to the judge when you enter the courtroom, and when you leave the courtroom, you have to bow again. You have to be dressed in a business suit. That's really important. You really have to listen. Do not interpret anything you're not sure about. Always interrupt. And if you're in the courtroom and you realize 5 minutes down the road or 15 minutes that you interpreted something wrong, then do not be shy to interrupt. You have to, in a courtroom session, interrupt and say, I would like to go back and clarify that word. I believe I misinterpreted it. Because everything in the courtroom is being recorded. They have a transcript of everything that's been said by the interpreter, by the judge, by the defense lawyer, by the lab, by everybody in the courtroom. Some interpreters, unfortunately, some of the accused or ended up going free. Some of the innocent people ended up going to jail because the interpreter made mistakes in interpreting and did not know her or his terminology quite well. So
Yeah,
you really need to know how the court system works. You have to know your legal terminology. You have to study your legal terminology. You need to show up to court anytime. Just go to the closest nearest courthouse beside you and sit there and observe how the court session is being conducted.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to get some experience, exposure to it. When I was a kid, actually, so my dad's a lawyer. He used to take us to watch trials just to get an idea of what, how the legal system works in the country. And even as a kid, it was something that I found really valuable. So if you're going to be part of that setting, that's something that definitely would be a beneficial thing to do, apart from obviously having some court certification, and
Oh,
just
absolutely. Court certification, going on the internet and seeing how a session is conducted in a legal setting, and so on.
yeah,
Being a skilled court interpreter, one of the most important things as well is during the breaks, or when they break for lunch or a break, the lab and his family or her family would be sitting outside the courtroom. As an interpreter, of course, they're going to come and try to speak to you and have conversations with you, or ask you to go to lunch with them or for coffee. You need to turn them down politely and let them know that you're an interpreter. Interpreters cannot mix with the lab, with the clients, at all, because you are being watched all the time.
yeah, and it's just like you said, you recently had done an assignment, and or do you remember the assignment I'm talking about? You had been approached by the client or the LEP, and in the end had to become a witness. So there's certain protocols and procedures, just like the slide said.
Absolutely. This is really important because as anybody in court, we can all become witnesses. So I was interpreting in a criminal trial setting, and the accused at lunchtime, I went to the cafeteria in the courthouse to have my lunch, while the accused followed me to the courthouse and asked if he can join me for lunch. And I said, no, I'm sorry, absolutely not. I'm an interpreter and I have ethical principles to follow, so I'm not allowed to sit down and have lunch with you. He kept insisting, and I said, I'm sorry. As I'm ordering my lunch, he goes, I would like to speak to you about something that has nothing to do with the trial. And I said, I can't speak to you. He insisted. He started telling me about having the witness change their testimony. And right away, what I did, I went up to the prosecutor or the crown, whatever you want to call them, and I told him exactly what the accused said to me. Of course, he was happy that I was being honest and went and told him what the accused said. Then I became a witness. I was no longer able to continue with my interpreting session. Some interpreters might have not gone and told the crown or the prosecutor because they didn't want to lose money, and they would have kept wanting to keep on interpreting so they can make money. Well, trust me, people in the court system would rather that the interpreter be honest and ethical, and they'll call you again for more jobs, than an interpreter that's going to stay silent so they can continue interpreting and make more money.
Exactly. Great point, Jasmine, and excellent anecdote there. I'm going to continue on the next slide just because we have a bit more to cover and our time is running short. And I do want to leave some time at the end for questions and a little bit of dialogue here. So let's just move to the next slide here. 1 second. So we already kind of went over this here, but this lays things out more in detail. And obviously this presentation is something we always send out to the registrants of the webinar, and it's also going to be available on our YouTube channel, something that will be sent out to you as well. But here, Jasmine, did you want to comment on any of these specific protocols?
Yes, please. Some of these protocols so important. So interpreting protocols, as we know, you always have to take full responsibility of your work. So meaning you cannot hand in any work or go to any assignment without it being quality work. Do not accept assignment if you're not sure about medical or legal or business or any of that stuff. Show respect to clients all the time, to the English-speaking person and to the lab. Be honest about your ability to do the assignment or not. Now, as a culture interpreter, we have an advantage here to teach and educate the people that work in the medical field or legal field, such as therapists, doctors, nurses. If you know of something like, let me give you a situation here. I was interpreting for a doctor, and the family came in, the Arabic-speaking family, the brothers, siblings, and the teenage girl. The doctor asked the teenage girl in front of her family if there is a chance that she could be pregnant. Well, at that moment, I knew what was going to happen. The father, the brother, they were all furious with the doctors. It's like, how dare you ask? This is our teenage daughter. We are Muslims. We are Arabs. She's not married. So my role as an interpreter and culture advisor is just to take the doctor after the session to the side and educate them that in this culture, you do not ask the teenage girl if there's a chance she could be pregnant in front of her brother and in front of her father. Always ask her in privacy. Now, for me to do damage control as an interpreter, I had to let the father know and the brother and the mother that this is something that they do here. They didn't mean anything by the doctor and so on. Another thing, clarify differences in dialect so there's no confusion. When you go accept the assignment, before you start the assignment, make sure that you speak to the lab person to see if you're able to communicate with one another.
Yeah.
Never. Go ahead, Caroline.
Sorry to interject here, but that's a really good point. For interpreters that I just want to highlight this, for interpreters that are on our platform, obviously when we are onboarding the interpreters, we make sure that the dialects make sense, obviously, but in on-site interpretation assignments, that definitely is something that one should do because dialects make a huge difference in the meaning and interpreting assignment.
Absolutely. Never, you know how sometimes we're at home and we speak English and our native language in the same sentence. Well, we can do that at home, but we can never ever do it during an assignment. Think about it. A person doesn't speak English, and we're using English and Arabic, for example, or English and Spanish, whatever, in the same sentence. They're confused, and it's not professional to do that. So always make sure that you only speak the language, interpret what's been said in your mother tongue, and that's it. Never mix the two languages. Always have, when you can, dictionaries with you. Sometimes all of us, nobody is perfect. It doesn't matter how many years of experience we have a dictionary. If you get stuck with a meaning or a word, don't be shy to interrupt and say, the interpreter would like to interrupt. I would like to clarify a word. Look at my dictionary. There's nothing wrong with that. It is better to do that than interpret wrong terminology. Definitely. Make sure always have your cell phones turned off or on silent. A professional interpreter never has her phone on or take a phone call.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jasmine, for highlighting these points. I know a lot of it can seem really self-explanatory or logical, but you know, we see a lot of interpreters, or not a lot, but I still see interpreters that do things that, you know, are not very professional. So I always like to highlight these things, you know, and it's always good to keep them in mind. Let's move on to the next topic here. 1 second. So just a few final thoughts. I wanted to highlight the topic of cultural sensitivity because that's something that Jasmine has a lot of experience in, and remaining impartial, showing empathy at the same time. So Jasmine, do you think you could talk to us a little bit about your work with some of the Syrian refugees? That's a really interesting topic. What sort of interactions and experiences have you had with them, and how has it been something that has taught you or showed you that, you know, you still can show empathy but practice cultural sensitivity but remain impartial?
Yes, of course, as an interpreter we have to remain impartial, but at the same time we have to have some empathy and be sensitive to their culture. I'm going to give you an example. One time I went with the police and we went to arrest somebody from the house. The wife had a hijab on, of course, she was Muslim. But as we're aware, some of the women that wear hijabs, they're not allowed to be without hijabs, or they don't feel comfortable being without their hijab unless it's their immediate family or female. So, of course, I had to ask the policeman to give her a moment to put her hijab back on before she can open the door, because the police was ready to enter the house while the lady was screaming I don't have my hijab on. So that's one thing. And that's where an interpreter has empathy, and the interpreter has to understand the culture sensitivity in this area. Um, so sometimes the lab, the Syrian refugees might come to me and start talking or asking me questions, or they're not happy with certain situations, or they don't feel comfortable with the culture or how the doctor is treating them or the policeman or so on. Of course, I take that Syrian person and I interpret it to the doctor or the policeman or whoever, and tell them that about their concerns, why the culture difference, and educate them on culture differences. I cannot here take the English speaking person's side and disrespect the Syrian person. No, that doesn't make me a good interpreter. Of course, I have to be impartial and neutral, but I still have to respect the culture and show empathy. If I am an interpreter, that's if I see a Syrian person, for example, and I'm a Muslim interpreter, and I see that they have a boyfriend or they're not married, but yet they have children, well, I shouldn't look down at them and disrespect them for that because I happen to be a religious interpreter. That's not my role here. My role is to respect everybody and to educate everyone, whether they're English speaking or not, and to show empathy and to educate everyone on the culture.
That's great.
And code of ethics and being ethical and genuine person
Yeah,
and impartial at the same time.
exactly. And it's going to be a more meaningful work for you if you practice it in that way as well.
I
So
have
we're
I
getting
have sorry a quick example.
okay.
Speaking of Syrians, of course when Syrians first came, they're very stressed. They had faced traumas and everything. So before a job, I was working for the Red Cross, and one of the Syrian guys in front of all his friends said to me, for example, I am ready to set a place on fire, or I'm really angry with the system here and whatever. So now my job as an interpreter is to interpret everything. So at the time, I had to inform these people and say, listen, whatever you say to me, I have to interpret because that's my role as an interpreter. So if there is something you don't want them to know, then don't say it. And please do not speak to me outside of the interpreting session.
Great point. So we're kind of coming towards the end of our time here, actually passed a little bit. But I wanted to just highlight here on this last slide, or last second to last slide. This is Jasmine's website, has her contact information. So feel free to reach out to her. I'm sure she'd be happy to hear from you guys. She does a training. You can talk about that a little bit, Jasmine. Just the training that you do on the code of ethics for interpreters.
Yes, I hold workshops on training on code of ethics, interpreting protocols, on the do's and don'ts, how to conduct an interpreting session, where your positions.
Mhm.
So all of this stuff, and I do it in person, on Skype, via
Yeah,
phone call. So I do it for clinical counselors as well. Anybody that needs to learn, because not only interpreters need to learn how to conduct a session, but even counselors, therapists, doctors, you name it. And
right.
as well, I do private interpreting sessions for one-on-one interpreters or one-on-two
Yeah.
and so on.
So that's a great resource to have. Apart from that, so I did see a question here in the panel, just about specifically recommendations for organizations where to obtain legal certification in New York. So obviously varies by state, but you can check out the National Center for State Courts um, for more information on your state. That said, if you do want more information, please feel free to email me. I'm always happy to have a one-on-one session with you, just chat, get to know you, um, and give you a little bit more detailed information. So next, I always want to share the next webinar. Next webinar is going to be October 23rd, 11 a.m. PST, episode number 4. We're going to be speaking with Francisco Pimienta, who's one of our veteran Spanish medical interpreters, been with us since the beginning, and he's a very professional and has a lot of great experience to share. So we're going to be speaking with him about his new role at the International Medical Interpreters Association. More ways to keep in touch with us. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, follow our blog, and then the YouTube channel also is there, and it's going to air all of our webinars. Sorry, Jasmine, did you want to say something?
No, sorry. Yes, that was great point, Caroline. But there is just something, I don't know if we have time for the advice I would give to interpreters.
We're kind of past time, but you can, if you want to say just a couple things, that would be great.
Just remember, if you want to become a good interpreter, always take control of the situations. Interpret in first person. It's always important to keep in mind that you're watched at all times, whether you're interpreting in first person or via the phone or video remote.
Exactly. Great points. If I just check here real quick, see if there's any other questions here on the panel. I don't see anything, but thank you guys so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, Jasmine, so much for your sharing your experiences with us. It's been so much fun talking to you and preparing this presentation with you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for having me here. Thank you, all participants.
All right. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you in October.